Hello, Guilty Feminist listeners. This is Deborah. I have a bonus episode for you now. We've been doing a lot of Road to Gilead, and this is something a little bit different. It was a Zoom recording, so please bear with us on the audio quality, which isn't up to its normal standard. But it was such an interesting conversation about cars and rethinking our relationship to them by Dame Professor Henrietta Moore that I thought you might be interested and like to hear it. So strap in for that now, and on Monday will be the very first in the official series of the Road to Gilead, which will be the very first in the official series of the Road to Gilead Guilty Feminist, which will be the very first in the Road to Gilead Guilty Feminist series. We've had two brilliant shows, both sold out, and the rest look to sell out as well. So please get tickets now if you'd like to. You can go to guiltyfeminist.com and click on live shows. There is still a handful left, even for Russell. There is still a handful left for Russell T Davies because he's only just gone on sale very recently. He's going to talk to us about the fears that he has. He's going to talk to us about what we have to be incredibly vigilant about with the LGBTQ plus community, given the rise of Christian nationalism, but also the power of story and how he's been able to change and how he's been able to genuinely change societal view with shows like Queer as Folk and It's a Sin. So I'd love you to come along and see that live if you could. There are two others. There are still tickets for on the 10th and the 16th. On the 10th, we're going to be talking to Reverend Lucy Winkett about Reverend Lucy Winkett from St James's Piccadilly about how we keep Christian nationalism out of our churches. And I think that's going to be a really, really interesting conversation. So if you can come along to that, or Baroness Barker on the 16th, who's going to talk to us about democracy and how we can use it better, I think you'll really get a lot out of these Road to Gilead shows. The community feel there is fantastic as well. But now, a bonus episode about cars. This is The Guilty Feminist, the podcast in which we explore our noble goals as 21st century feminists and the hypocrisies and insecurities which undermine them. My guest today is the founder and director of the Institute for Global Prosperity and chair in culture, philosophy and design at University College London. Her new book, Roadkill, Unveiling the True Cost of Our Toxic Relationship with Cars, co-authored with Arthur Kay, explores the financial, social, ethical, and environmental impacts of our obsession with and dependency on cars. Please welcome to the podcast, Professor Dame Henrietta Moore. Now, Henrietta, before we get into the very important conversation we're going to have today, do you have any I'm a Feminist buts? Has Ned told you about this game? Great.
I do. I'm a feminist, but I really love a bacon sandwich. And of course, that's the problem. Given the rise of veganism, the meat industry, everything we should be doing to protect the planet. So
absolutely.
It's a tricky one.
We're all working towards a more plant-based lifestyle. And bacon sandwiches, I know, are the downfall of many because they are very delicious. And we're working towards, this is The Guilty Feminist, things we're guilty about. We build muscle and we try and work towards overcoming them. So Henrietta, your book is fascinating. Can you, before we get into that, explain to me and the listeners about your work as the founder and director of the Institute for Global Prosperity? What's the aim of the Institute and how does it go about achieving its aim?
Well, the aim of the Institute is to start a different kind of conversation. So that conversation is, what is an economy in the 21st century and what should we do for it? So one way to think about that is to play a game that I played with myself, which is called the State of the Nation. So you can play this State of the Nation game in whatever country you're in the world. You don't have to be in the UK. But if we play it a little bit for the UK, for example, let's just think about the fact that the median salary in the UK is about £35,000, which means that all of the top CEOs of the FTSE 350 earn about 52 times what a typical worker. In other words, it takes them precisely 2.5 days to earn 35. So wealth inequality is growing. And then we have the problem of what's happening with children. So in the UK, 4.5 million children live in poverty. That's one child in 3. They're missing school because they don't have shoes or they don't have PE kit. If you take the population as a whole, then you've got about 16 million people living in poverty, 24% of the population. So this is meant to be the 21st century. So the question is, when did you hear anything about that the last time you turned on the news or the last time you looked at your newspaper? You might have picked up the odd article, but this should really be the top discussion of the day. I mean, what's going on in the state of the nation? And so we need a new kind of conversation. I started the Institute for Global Prosperity, or we call it the IGP, which is a lot easier to say, because I wanted to think about what are we really doing about people's quality of life around the world? Who's got some new ideas about how we're going to improve it? What are those new ideas? And are we really discussing them very broadly across the societies that we live in? And the answer to that is no, we're not. So over in my neck of the woods in the IGP, what we do is we try to start those conversations. We start them with a whole range of different kinds of people, so local residents, local businesses, NGOs or civil society organizations, lots of people like the local statistics authority, anybody who's really interested in having that conversation and thinking about how we can get together to drum up a few new ideas.
It's really interesting, and as you say, it's just not right that, in a country as wealthy as the United Kingdom, where there's extreme wealth in parts of London, individuals in London, that a third of children are living in poverty. That's absolutely wild. Like, you just can't even imagine that children don't have shoes to go to school in what is a developed and wealthy nation. So this is a really important thing. Some academics are seen as like ideas people rather than hands-on practitioners. What made you decide to take such a proactive approach?
Well, I think that one of the things that really worried me was how little progress we are making. And that's a problem because you would surely want for all of us to be living in societies which are in some sense moving forward, improving in some way or other.
Yes.
And I suddenly thought, what am I actually doing about this? I've got lots of ideas. I've written lots about kinds of issues to do with social sciences and gender and the world at large. But what am I actually doing about it? And then I realized that you have to begin where I would always begin as an anthropologist, and that is by talking to people themselves, because they know exactly what the sharp end of the experience is. And that's a good starting point. So I wanted to get involved much more directly in thinking about how you can bring people into new kinds of discussions. And that's an interesting debate, very interesting debate, because it takes you straight into the heart of what do you think a modern democracy looks like and who is contributing to that discussion in a modern democracy. So whose voice are you hearing?
Absolutely. And what action can we take that feels like a collective joint decision towards a fairer world, which is such a practical, pragmatic way of approaching it. We're living in quite challenging times for Western academia. Some of your work has openly centered on gender and feminism. Can I ask you about how you're experiencing the increasing hostility emanating, especially from the United States, but growing across the Western world, towards anything to do with gender or feminism? And we're seeing Trump now make, if your thesis has a word like gender or even women in it, it gets flagged as this. Will this be funded, or will your international place be honoured? That kind of thing. How are you dealing with that?
Well, it's incredibly difficult because the impact is right across the spectrum of feminist activity, everything from what's happening to the money that's supposed to be supporting women and girls in the global south to the sharp end of what's really supporting cutting edge feminist research in universities. And it's the breadth of this attack is actually quite not just alarming, it's quite overwhelming, I think, as an
Mhm.
individual and even as an academic who's been working for a long time on issues of gender. And it takes me back to the point I just made a second or two ago, which is that are we going backwards or are we going forward? And the real impetus, I think, behind what's going on in the United States at the moment is that it wants to take over a public space and to do so by saying, well, certain kinds of things are just not in that public. They're not things you can discuss. They're not things that you need to think about. They're not legible. You can't see them. Only strange, weird people are at all interested in these things. And those people are the kind of people who want to bring down society or to ruin your way of life or to prevent you from having the freedoms which you've found so hard to win. And so you get pushed to the edges of discussion. And as you get pushed to the edges of discussion, you end up being like that small child in the classroom raising their hand saying, I know the answer, me. And inevitably, you get told to shut up. And that effect of being told to shut up actually is effective. It's hugely effective. And it's
Hmm.
already beginning to have an impact, especially in American universities. And you can see that people are basically keeping quiet.
What do you think the answer is? How do we fight it?
Well, the answer is that we always do best when we get together. So we
Mhm.
have to have more of these discussions about how we bring together the diverse communities across the globe that make up what we think of as the feminisms of the world, which are all very different because their challenges have been different, their histories are different, their problems are different, and their solutions are certainly very different. And we have to stop trying to get everybody to eat the same kind of bacon sandwich, or indeed not to eat any kind of bacon sandwich at all. So it's the way in which we can start conversations with others. And that's an important part of the way that we try to work in the Institute for Global Prosperity, which is that we try to create spaces where we can curate new kinds of conversation. Because
Mm.
if you can get diverse people together in a room, you find that you have diverse voices which are being listened to. And those diverse voices bring new ideas. Those new ideas allow for new values to emerge. And when new values emerge, new kinds of solutions become possible because you can start to think about, okay, so we might all be divided on a certain issue, but one of the things we're prepared to work on together is this particular thing, whatever that thing is.
Mhm.
And one of the things that I try to direct those conversations towards when I'm participating in them with others is, are we doing anything to improve the quality of people's lives? And if
Right,
we're not, are we therefore on the wrong track?
right. Um, yeah, that sounds very, very wise. And all of this background brings me to your upcoming book, Roadkill. So this book is like the Cowspiracy or the Dope Sick for cars. As somebody said to me recently, this book will do for cars what Jaws did for sharks. It completely dismantles our relationship with car ownership and reliance on cars, going far beyond environmental challenges. Why did you decide to write this book?
Well, Arthur and I have been collaborating for quite a number of years, more than 10. And he is an award-winning entrepreneur, he's a businessman, and I'm an academic. So the first thing that we thought about is, okay, what from our different perspectives can we bring if we get together on this? So it was a practical thing of how to do something, how to actually meet a challenge as opposed to just write books. And the reason why we chose cars, I think, is because we wanted to choose something that we all like and share, that most of us have. If we don't have one, we know how to drive one. And we've certainly been in one. And we've certainly been to the movies and loved films which are car films. And all of us have that moment when you're flicking through the colour supplement, some kind of Sunday newspaper, insofar as those things exist anymore. And you see a beautiful new car and you think, oh, wow, that's absolutely amazing. Um, and that's even worse than bacon sandwiches, because for a feminist, we're certainly not supposed to be buying any one of those things. But in a way, we wanted to use cars as a kind of think object or a think problem, how to think a problem. Because I'm very keen in my own way of starting not with the theory or even with the framework, but with the problem. So what's the problem here? And cars allow you to work through a whole set of different kinds of challenges and trade-offs that are at the core of a lot of conflict in contemporary life. Because one thing that people feel very strongly about often is their freedom. They think cars represent or symbolize that freedom. And as one person said to me when he was talking to me about it, when we were doing the research for the book, I want to be able to drive my car anywhere I want, park it anywhere I want, and do exactly what I want. That's what freedom means to me. And of course, if that's what freedom means to you, then there's the slight problem of what's happening to everybody else whilst you're parking your car just everywhere you feel like doing.
Yes, your freedom is impinging on other people's freedom. So could you tell us what the big issue is with cars? What does this book expose?
Well, I think it's first of all, it doesn't start so much by exposing things, although it does do a lot of that. But it starts by saying, okay, what kind of a conversation have we been having about things like that? And it tries to set out a framework for thinking of a new way of doing it. So one of the things that we say is, okay, yes, we love cars. Both Arthur and I drive. We love cars. We are going to drive probably for the rest of our lives. But the question is, why have we been sold this story about the car being such a symbol of freedom? And why is it so important to us that it affects us when people say they want to take our cars away? And so one of the things we did there is we said, okay, perhaps we've misunderstood what freedom is. So freedom isn't just about freedom from constraint. It's about the freedom to live the best possible life you can live, and also to put in place the best possible life your children and your grandchildren could live. Now, if you start asking those questions, then you can see that perhaps the old freedoms of the 20th century might need to be supplemented by some new freedoms of the 20th. So that's where we began before we started the expose.
So there'll be people listening who think, well, I just can't do without my car. But you're not saying no one should drive or that cars should be banned. You're thinking about a new way. You're proposing a new way of thinking about cars. So what would be the ideal scenario in your mind?
Well, I think the first thing would be that we've got lots of action going on around the world already, where people are already doing this work. So it's about asking people themselves what they want to do about it. And it turns out that when you go to cities all around the world, so if you go to Milan or Stockholm or to Barcelona or even to New York, that people are saying, actually, we want more green spaces in our cities. We don't want to be sitting in a traffic jam all the time. We want our children to be able to walk to school, which they can't do at the moment. We want to be able to cross the road. We want to be able to get where we want to go. And so lots of communities have already come together and started thinking about, well, what are the local solutions that we can bring to this problem? What could we do with the resources we have by talking to local business and the local governments and local authorities of various kinds? And so they've started creating new ways of taking back the streets, making streets into parks, making neighborhoods so that you can't just drive through them. So if you live in them, you can drive in and out of your neighborhood the way you do. But if you don't live in the neighborhood, then you will have to park up in a car park and walk in, or take some public transport, so that you're not, in other words, taking over the streets of everybody in that neighborhood. So that's one of the ways, for example, that they tackle that situation in Barcelona, and that's quite effective. So we're looking at all the ways in which people have come up with different ways of doing this and saying, when you get together, you can come up with some solutions to some of these problems, which look quite intractable when you're fighting each other over them.
Yes, somebody I know who's in the car business told me that the car business is entirely unsustainable because there's just so many, many thousands and thousands of cars, millions of cars across Europe, and there's nowhere for them to go except into landfill effectively. Like it's just the car industry is unsustainable environmentally and quite literally. We just don't know what's going to happen because more and more people now buy things last less long. People buy things more quickly. Something breaks down, instead of fixing it, they buy something new. And so we are looking down the barrel of some very serious um, unsustainability with cars, with the pollution that they create, with needing gas and petrol and to sustain them. Um, it is a it is going to be a crisis quite soon. So you're suggesting, in part, people drive to the outside of a city and then catch public transport in.
Well, that might be a solution in some places, but it's going to be very difficult to do in, say, parts of the United States, which are just completely car dependent. All their cities have
Uh-huh.
been designed around the car. So you have 19-lane highways driving straight into the city. And one of the problems is that people themselves don't want to take transport because they feel that public transport is expensive, slow, and so on. But one of the things we have to realize is that the way that what we call the car industrial complex has taken over our lives and taken over the city. So the amount of money that cities spend, not just on building these 19-lane highways and then building all of the car parking in the city that needs to be there, that money, if it wasn't being spent for cars, could be invested in other things, not only public transport, which would be one, but also in education or in health or in other things.
Mhm.
And we've now arrived at one of these strange moments, which I feel is very emblematic of the global north and the way that we think about a solution to a problem. So some of these big highways in the United States are preventing wildlife from moving from one area of the state to another area of the state. And these animals are getting killed as they try to cross these 19
Oh no.
lane highways. So the solution to this problem has been to build a bridge for the animals over the top of the 19-lane highway, which
And
I'm
do
not
the
quite
animals
sure how
use
they.
that?
Well, I don't know. I don't think anyone's spoken to them, so I'm not sure about how they're going to know
Well,
whether
you see
they
it with the
should be.
presumably they put night cameras on to make sure that the animals are using them, and
They are still, yeah, exactly. They're still building them and tracking them, of course,
they
etc.
see whether or not there's the same amount of roadkill. Um,
Indeed.
it's but that's actually something that you don't think about with cars. You don't think about the impact on wildlife, and of course, our ecosystems are dependent on wildlife, and
Yeah.
so we're killing things left, right, and center, environmentally, um, with fumes, with accidentally killing animals. There's all sorts going on that we need to have a rethink about. Can I ask, you described cars as the most successful product ever. I'm a huge Mad Men fan, the show about advertising in the 60s, and I can't help uh, thinking that those men deliberately tied car ownership and driving to a notion of Western masculinity that's now inherently linked to that. So it's sort of like, if you're a man, you drive a car, you drive a big car, you probably drive a gas guzzling car, or you drive a fancy sports car. You have a 4x4, you have there is a lot of status attached to cars and in ideas of masculinity, all sorts of ideas attached to cars that were invented for us in the 60s by the men on Madison Avenue. Um, can you talk a little bit about that? These ideas of cars as status symbols, or there's caregiving, the family car. There's a lot of advertisements for family cars, and you've got to keep your family safe, um, make your family's life easy. There's a lot of, there was that Vance Packard book in the 60s, I think, called The Hidden Persuaders, about how they started to link ideas and say, okay, we're not selling a car, we're selling security, or we're not selling a car, we're selling sex appeal. How much do you think that is responsible for our ideas of cars now and what they mean to people?
Oh, I think a huge amount. And I think that when you talk to people about how much their car costs, they routinely underestimate its true cost.
Mm.
So, for example, people will tend to tell you the headline figure for how much they're paying a month on their car loan, because most people buy a car on some sort of loan, whether it's a new car or a second-hand car. But they forget to tell you about how much they have to pay in parking, or how much they have to pay in insurance, or how much they have to pay in repair. But the more interesting thing is when you ask them, so how much money would I have to give you to give your car up? It's much more money than the money they actually spend on the car. In other words, the way people feel about the car is that they consistently overvalue it and overvalue its
Oh.
role in their lives, and consistently
And
undervalue public
I
transport.
and I do understand there's a certain level of uh ab- ability, inclusivity, I suppose, that comes with having a car. I can get there. Um, if I've got kids, I can put them in the back and we can all get there. There's a there's access. Women are equal in their ability to use them in certainly in countries where there are some countries where women aren't allowed to drive, but that is rare. So, you can get there, you can feel safe. Um, there's a sort of A to B about it. There's a convenience of I come out of my house, I get in my car, I get out at the other end, I go in. And I understand that. There is a feeling of security, of safety, of I'm not going to be waiting around in the dark. I'm not going to have to get into a stranger's car in terms of an Uber or wait for a bus out on my own. There is a feeling of safety, which we understand people have. And um, is that is that something that you factor in?
Yeah, very much so. And so that's one of the reasons why we don't talk about this book is not about finger wagging. It's not a kind of green manifesto where we're saying you have to eat your green. In other words, that you're going to have to give up things that you really value. What we're saying is, let's think about different ways of having options and choices as to how you move around. So if you wanted to take your family away for the weekend, then you would need a car. And so you would use a car. But do you need to own one all of the time, given that
Mhm.
90% of the time is actually stationary, sitting outside your house? The amount of time that you drive your car is actually very small. So many people imagine that the car is something constantly on the move. But when we actually look at the research, cars are mostly stationary, and that's not taking into account when they're stuck in traffic jams. That's just talking
Mhm.
about how much do you use them. And I think that if we had a situation where, we've got plenty of digital platforms now, on-demand services, we've got plenty of ways in which you can drive a car anytime you wanted to, but do you need to own one? And do you need to be taking up that space on the street all the time with that? Bearing in mind that when you build, say you're building a new block of flat in London, you have to, because of the planning regulations, put in places for people to park. Once you put in places for people to park, and the builder has to make provision for that, then you're effectively ratcheting up the cost of each individual um, flat,
Of
because it's
course, yeah.
actually paying for the car, whether you have a car or not. And housing costs, when you add them to transport costs to people, are the major thing that makes people's lives insecure at the moment. Major costs people can't meet. And so adding your car to your housing costs is bad enough. But recognizing that your car, your parking availability, is actually increasing your housing costs in the first place is a step further that is very helpful, I think, to realize.
I actually am a member of a car club.
Mm.
So there's cars around the corner from me, and then if those are all taken, there's cars in various different directions, a short walk away, and I do that because I actually rarely need a car in London. To be honest, London it's a nightmare to park. There's congestion charges. It's there's really almost no point in having a car here, in my opinion. Having said that, I don't have children. I have friends who have children who want to get their children to places who for whom it makes life a lot easier. But um, I don't have children, and if we want a car, we book one on the Zipcar. And because we're members of the club app, you can just go online, you can book it out for a certain number of hours. There's no congestion charge to pay because they waive it because you're part of that car club and you're making London less congested by not owning your own car. And it includes the petrol. There's a little credit card in the glove box. So if you stop to get petrol, you fill it up. But if you do only a certain amount of miles, that's all included. It's very reasonably priced because it is all supplemented by the government because they're encouraging people into doing it. And I do highly recommend it because we just never have to think about MOT. We never have to think about any expenses associated with a car or any responsibilities. We never have to think, oh no, the brakes have gone. We're gonna have to, how much is that going to cost? How long are we going to be without the car? It's just all taken care of by somebody else. So I do highly recommend the car club if you're somebody who doesn't have to drive every single day, or even if you did, it might be, I don't know how much, might be cheaper over time to book it at the same time every day to do a certain trip. One disappointment that I had is you critique the electric car industry. I had thought the electric car industry would solve our problems. Can you tell us what the problem is with electric cars, and why do we think that they represent a panacea? Why have we been led to believe that they're the solution?
Well, we've been led to believe their solution because the guys who run the car industry um, don't want to stop buying cars.
Right.
So the idea is, how can we persuade people that they can have a greener car and still have a car? So what we're saying is, yes, electric cars are better than non-electric cars. We need to move away from fossil fuels. That's quite clear. But there are a few things that you need to understand about. So the first is that electric cars are, on average, because of the battery, heavier. So they are more problematic in terms of what their impact is if they hit a pedestrian or another car. And also people's tendency at the moment, not everywhere in the world, so not China, for example, but around the world in general, people are moving towards bigger cars. They've bought this idea of the car security thing. So everybody's driving around in an SUV. You will have noticed that in London. Quite unnecessary to have any kind of SUV in London. But if it hits a child, it's going to do very much more damage than a much lighter car. Some of these SUVs are almost the weight of a small tank. So they're huge, extraordinary machines to have on the road. So the eco car or the electric car is a good thing, but you also have to factor in a couple of other things. So the first thing is, how is the electric energy in your country produced? If it's produced from renewables, then the electric car is really saving the planet, because actually it's using energy that's produced renewably. If, on the other hand, it's using electric energy, it's being charged by energy that's produced by the burning of fossil fuels, then you're simply burning more fossil fuel. So this is the kind of argument that we make in the book, where we take people through these sorts of different kinds of steps. And one of them is to say, what should I know? So what are the kinds of things that you might want to know about? So the information that's out there. Another is, what can I hope for? So is it possible to do anything about any of these problems? And then the third thing is, what should I do? Principally, what should I do with others? The way of thinking about how we tackle it together.
So if you've got an electric car in the United Kingdom, Australia, New Zealand, the United States of America, Canada, which is where most of our listeners will be, are you doing the right thing or the wrong thing?
Well, for the moment, you're probably doing the right thing, but you also have to think about the question of how do we live in the world as it is today. So regardless of what Mr. Trump now says about isolationism and so on, we are all connected to each other, and you have to ask yourself, where is the lithium for these batteries coming? And the lithium from these batteries is often coming from parts of the world which themselves are already under financial pressure and have been under financial pressure for some time and are now under extreme environmental pressure, like the Atacama Desert. So here you have situations where something is being extracted from an environment which is making the lithium battery, which allows you to have a green car, but its impact on somebody else's life is negative.
So is it sort of impossible to do the right thing now? What should we be campaigning for? What should we be trying to do? How can we fight back? How can women especially fight back, given the nature of our podcast? What do we do here?
Well, I think what we suggest in the book, and what I believe myself, is that you start with something small. So if, for example, you've just given your example of the car club, and I don't have a car in London either. When I need a car, I use one. There are lots of ways to get one, as you said. And that means that you are already putting less pressure on the environment and on the streets, making the streets safer. You're doing all of those things. All of those things are positive. Buying an electric car will be a good thing to do, but you also have to be active around the question of what's the impact of that lithium extraction on the environment. And that may mean that you need to actually be pushing your own government to have fairer deals with the governments of these countries that are producing the lithium, because at the moment it's an extractive issue. So, the main governments here are doing deals with, Chile or wherever, which are very, very advantageous to the big car companies, but not so advantageous to the people who live there. So you might have to pay, for example, slightly more for your electric car, or you might want to say to your government, rather than subsidizing new electric cars, because those are principally bought by people who can afford to take out a car loan or take out a car, buy a car without taking out a loan, rather. You should start thinking about, how can we work in a way that forces trade agreements that support people's livelihoods in the places where those kinds of extractive industries are going on. And historically, of course, we haven't done that. I mean, with fossil fuels, we have routinely gone around the world just extracting as much oil and so on from people as we wanted, and giving them very little in return.
Right. Okay, so what we need to do is we need to buy your book and then campaign our governments to limit the cars on the road, to address pollution, the death of wildlife, where we're getting our lithium from, and ideally join car clubs wherever we can, so that we're sharing cars with everybody and we're sharing the environmental impact with everybody in our street, and only using the cars as and when. But the more we use car clubs, the more the car clubs will have cars for us to use whenever is convenient, the more car clubs there'll be. So the more people join, the more convenient it'll be. I personally find I can always get a car when I need one.
Yeah.
And if I can't, I might have to wait a little bit. But if it's important, I just book in advance. If I'm going to a wedding that I'm not going to be able to, I mostly use trains. I don't use a car unless I absolutely have to. I don't use a plane unless I absolutely have to. I use trains. Trains in this country are expensive and they are unreliable. I'm aware of that. And you'll have to book in advance so that I don't pay huge fees for the trains. Trains should be a lot cheaper. But I think that's the other thing we should campaign for. Make public transport cheaper and more accessible, because there are some cities where in the really middle of the city, public transport's free. You can just jump on and off. And London, they seem to put the prices up all the time. So I think we need to be saying to our governments, we want cheaper, more reliable public transport, And then we want accessible car clubs, and we'll use those things if you give them to us, and we need to show that that's the way. And if you want to know more about this in more detail about the impact, the big, wider, global, as well as the local environmental impact of cars, and how we can start to rethink our relationship with them, then this is the book that you must get. It's called Roadkill, and it's by Professor Dame Henrietta Moore and her co-writer Arthur Kay. Henrietta, it's been absolutely wonderful to have you on today. Is there anything you came to say that you didn't get to say?
No, but I really enjoyed being on, and I really enjoyed my thing about the bacon sandwich. So thank you for indulging me with that.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Henrietta. You've been absolutely
Thank you.
fantastic.